GDP. We're going to answer on this chapter, we're going to answer to this question. What is GDP? Okay. How is GDP related to nation total income and expenditure or spending? And what are the components of GDP, and how is GDP connected or corrected by inflation? Okay. And what is that to do with inflation? Does GDP measure society's well-being? Okay. We're going to answer all these questions in this chapter. Traditionally, remember, we divided economic field in two branches: macro, micro. Macro is the study of economy-wide phenomena like inflation, unemployment, economic growth. Okay. Gross domestic product. This is very well used word, GDP, in macroeconomics, which measure the total income of everyone in economy. Okay. At the same time, it should be equal to total expenditure on everybody's on buying the economy's output of goods and services. Okay. Is that so? We come up with this identity. Income must be equal to expenditure. Okay, for the economy as a whole. Income is equal to expenditure. As an individual too. If I'm a buyer, I want to buy a gallon of milk from Kroger. He's a seller. Well, I spend $2, okay, and that's my expenditure. He gains $2. That would be his income. Then this $2 should be equal, right? What I spent, the income that he made, money that I spent should be equal. As a whole is also true. If you recall our circular flow model, let's just go through it here. This circular flow model, you see the green arrow outside, a flow of money, dollar. The inside is the flow of tangible stuff like goods and services, right? Let's say here household go spend money to buy this stuff at this market. Okay, they spend money, right? As you see this arrow here, right? Well, these are their expenditure. Where this money goes? It goes to be revenue for firms. Okay, and whatever they spend, the firms gain. The revenue should be equal to expenditure, or income should be equal to spending. And same here, these firms go spend money, okay, to buy the factor of production to bring it here to make things, right? To get the labor and stuff to here. But at the same time, the money they spend is going to be income for the households. Okay, that's the first identity. Okay, with that logic, the total income in society should be equal to total expenditure in society. That's the identity. Okay, total expenditure. All right. Let's just go on. Now, as you see here in this diagram, there is no government. Okay, there is no foreigners. Okay, import export, no foreign. Okay, sector. All right. Then actually, there's 4 sectors in the more complex economy than just 2. We assuming there was no government here, no import export here. That was a simple circular flow model. But more complex one, you're going to have another at another sectors, government and foreigners, and they do the same thing. They go here, buy the stuff, They go, spend money. They take taxes from the firms, from the households, right? That's the income, or that's how much they make. And foreigners too. They come to our markets here, both of them. They go buy, or we go there buy their stuff. This is still these two way street: expenditure by foreigners and buying by foreigners from foreigners, or expenditure by government, or paying the government. Okay, that identity is still whole. Okay, that's what we're going to now talk about it in the whole. Let's go down here. Government collect taxes and also buy goods and services. Okay, the financial system matches saver supplies of the funds with borrowers' demand for the loans. The foreign sectors also trades goods and services, financial assets, currency, and so on. We're going to talk about this on a chapter by itself. But let's just get to this identity. Let's define the GDP first. Okay, you got to be careful with defining this one here. That video kind of gave you an idea, right? Market value of all final goods and services produced within the country, inside the country, in a given period of time. That's the definition of GDP. Okay? That's the definition of GDP. Market value. Goods are valued at their market prices. Okay? Let's say I said I made $100,000 last year. That's my income, right? We measure it by market value. That's how much my service is worth. Or we can say Joe bought a new car for $30,000. That's the market value. That's a measurement. That's the measurement we can calculate the GDP. Okay. All goods measured in the same unit. What is that unit? A dollar. Every country using different unit of money, right? Well, we got to exchange rate. How do they exchange? But let's assume we can exchange it all to dollars. Then we can calculate all economies around the world in dollar amount. Okay, that's the market value. Things that don't have a market value are excluded from GDP. Okay, we can't capture it. We can't capture housework by housewife, house husband. We can't capture the value of the wife that stay home, watch the kids, or cook a meal. But because is not, it didn't come to the market, but does not have value. Yes, it does. It has a value, but GDP is not perfect. It can't capture that. Let's say mom goes to work and puts her kids in babysitting, and he paid for that. That's capture. That's part of the GDP. But if she stay home, watch the kid, also she does a service watching her kids, but the market does not catch that. All right. All the market value of all the goods. Okay, GDP includes all the items produced in the economy sold legally in the market. Okay? Again, if it doesn't come to the market, GDP doesn't capture it, right? It excludes most items produced and sold illicitly because it doesn't capture it illegally. Some stuff is sold or barter. If I come exchange something with somebody else, then the GDP doesn't capture it. It excludes most items that are produced and consumed at home. Okay, that's why just remember, the definition, it branches out on different parts, and we emphasize on those. Another important word here is the final goods and services. Okay, not the used one. Okay, remember, all the income, we can calculate GDP from income approach, or we can calculate GDP from expenditure approach because of that identity. Then from expenditure approach, let's say I went and bought a used car. Okay, that's expenditure. I spent $2,000 to buy a used car. Does that expenditure included in the GDP for this year? No, because that was a used car. Okay, that car was calculated in the GDP that was produced brand new. Okay, then somebody bought it, somebody sold it back when it was the first time a new car that was captured in GDP. Then if somebody drove it 4 or 5 years and sell it to someone else, and those are not part of GDP. Okay. Then remember, final goods versus intermediate goods. Okay, what is the intermediate goods? Used as a component uh, or ingredients of production of other goods. Okay, let's say we made a car. Okay, let's see, this is a car. See if I drive right. Okay, this is a car, and we sold it brand new for $30,000. Okay, let's say this year. This is part of GDP, $30,000. Okay, somebody bought it, dealership sold it, we captured in GDP. Okay, that's part of the GDP. Okay, now if we say, okay, we sold that one, somebody has sold us 4 tires for it, for let's say $4,000. Okay, well, somebody sold it, somebody bought it, and that was $4,000 transaction in the market, 4 brand new tires. And I can add all the items here. Somebody did glasses for this car, make $3,000. Somebody made, let's say, engine for this car, sold us $2,000. Okay. Now these are expenditure too, but these are intermediate goods that goes to the car. It's not the final goods. Okay. If we capture all those in transaction, then it's going to overvalue the GDP. Then we say, okay, only let's say the GDP we only make one car. Then this car is going to add all this up. It's going to be $60,000. Okay, and that shouldn't be right because we are calculating in our GDP the intermediate goods. Okay, then we kind of double count it. We count the price of tires, right, twice. Once transaction just for the tires, one went to the cars for transaction for the whole cars. Okay, that's what we differentiate between final goods with intermediate goods. All right, what else? Let's go on. Goods and services. It's not just tangible goods, okay? We calculate the services in our GDP too. The plumber comes to your house and fix the plumbing, you pay him $200, that's part of the GDP. Goods and services. Okay? Produced, okay? Produced, which is produced in that period of time, not before. Okay, that would be used item. We exclude used item expenditure in our GDP. Okay, one produce new within the country. Okay, within the country, around the border. Okay, let's see. Within the country, let's say, okay, this is the United States, right? Okay, all this stuff built here inside the border is part of our GDP. Okay, it's part of our GDP. Now, let's say this engineer here go work in Mexico. Okay, he make money here. That's his income. That income is going to go to Mexico GDP, not USA GDP. Okay, and vice versa. If a Mexican engineer, teacher, doctor comes here, work in the United States, make money, is within the border that money, that service is created. That's part of the US GDP, not Mexico. Okay, that's what we think. Within the border, within the country, in a given period of time, in 1 year, in sometimes we calculate quarterly. Let's say last year, from January 1st to December 31st, how many, dollar wise, what is the market value of all this stuff, goods and services we made in our country, in USA, within the country, our final goods. Okay, how are we going to calculate that? Okay, then how much was the result for last year? Somewhere over $22 trillion, somewhere around 22, 23 trillion dollars. Okay, trillion dollars. Okay, then we use dollar amount, right? Okay, or how many we use in a quarter? Remember, we have 3 quarters. Okay, first quarter, second quarter. Uh, it changed too. Okay, for this year, because of this corona just hit us, the first quarter, January, February, March, April, the GDP shrink 20%, 30%. Why? Because all the factories shut down. Okay, services industry shut down. Airline industry shut down. The GDP dropped. Okay, how are we going to calculate it? But I want you to get the grasp of the definition of GDP, right? Okay, now component of GDP. Okay, remember GDP can be calculated in two ways: from expenditure approach and from income approach. Let's look at the expenditure approach. Okay, GDP is the total spending of all sector in the economy. Then we're going to branch it out in four. Okay, we're going to divide those sectors in four. One of them by household, we call it C, consumption. One of them expenditure, investment, firms go spend, right, on equipment, land, technology, whatever it is, we call it I. Again, our circular flow, we just had those two sectors. Now we're going to add government expenditure. Government go buy stuff too in the market, right? That's a G. And then we add another sector, which is NX, which is actually net export, which is export minus import. Okay, we just get the net amount of it. Okay, we call it NX. Okay, one of them has negative effect on GDP, import. We go buy from them, our money leave the society. Or if they come buy from us, that has a positive effect. Export has positive effect, import has negative effect. We get the result of it, we call it NX. It could be negative, which means that country import more than export. It could be zero, which means the trade is in balance. Whatever we spend on foreign economies is equal to the amount that they spend in our economy. Or it could be positive. China experiencing positive export for last decades. And ours is negative because we buy from them as much as they buy from us. But the NX is a small portion of the GDP. We're going to see it in our graph, see what are the percentage of this component in our GDP. Then we come with this identity here, okay? get hold of this. And remember, but why is total income in our economy? Okay, everybody's income, including government tax, including uh, uh, teachers, firemen, doctors. Everybody makes income. We know what everybody made last year, right? They know how much I made through our taxation, right? They know how much you made, how much engineer made, how much well the guy didn't work at all made. Of course, there are some cash transaction happen in our economy, created income, and GDP doesn't capture those. Okay, it's not a lot, but it's a percentage of it. We kind of calculated. We give it a percentage to the GDP that it hasn't captured. But this identity, everybody's income equal to everybody's expenditure, and we break down this everybody's expenditure in four components: household expenditure, firms expenditure, government's expenditure, and net amount of foreigners expenditure in our economy. Okay? This came out from the total spending should be equal to total income. Okay? That's our first identity. Let's just go ahead. Again, you just kind of break down what all those components are. Consumption, total spending by the households on goods services. Now, one exception here is housing cost, new housing. Okay, uh, if household, the newlywed, a couple just got married, they just go buy a brand new house for $200,000. Okay, that's exception here. We do not include that 200,000 in C. We will put it on I. We treat that as an investment. Okay, we treat that as an investment. It makes sense because they might just live in it for 5-6 years, then start renting it as an investment. Okay, or because it's such an investment, big investment, then we exclude. Okay, we exclude housing costs from C, and we include it in I. Okay, just remember that too. Not included in C, purchase of the new house, but included in I. Okay. I, total spending on goods services that used for future productions. Okay. Now, if McDonald's open up a new building, they go buy his equipment, uh, oven or Pizza Hut building, new building and buy ovens and tools and all that. These are investment expenditure that works towards the future production of goods and services, like business capital, business structures, equipment, intellectual property products, residential capital. Remember we talked about that? It doesn't go to C, it comes here, it goes to I. Landlord, apartment building, homeowners, personal residence. Now, this is another one, inventory accumulation. Okay, that goes to investment. Okay, let's say, what does that mean? Okay, investment does not mean the purchase of the financial asset like stocks and bonds. Okay, those are not investment. Okay, because those are already included in businesses investment. Then if somebody go buy it again, it's like buying the used stuff. Okay, that's not part of the GDP. Well, let's talk about the inventory accumulation. Let's just give you an example. Let's say GM made 500 cars last year, okay, and he sold 450. Okay, how do we treat this to calculate our GDP? Well, 450 cars was bought and sold by GM. Let's say, $500 million transaction capture, But what happened to that 50 cars that stay and unsold? How we treat that? Okay, that goes to the inventory. Come back next year, maybe 2 years later, then it's sold. Okay, how we treat that? We put this as an inventory build-up, and we put it as an investment in that year. Okay, inventory accumulation goes to investment for that year. 50 cars, whatever the value was, it goes to investment for that year. We're going to use some of these examples, practice it, and remember now. Government purchases, G, all spending, all goods services by government is also part of the GDP. Okay, at federal level, state level, or even local level. Okay. If City of Arlington build another high school, they spend $1 billion, and that expenditure is part of the GDP. One thing we exclude on that one would be transfer payments. What that means. Okay. Let's say federal government spend $10 billion on promoting armies equipment in facilities. That $10 billion is part of expenditure. Is a spend money. You spend dollars to buy equipment for military. Let's say government spend $5 billion on retirement or on unemployment or on food stamp to people. You spend money, you give money to people to go spend. And we exclude that from the government expenditure. We exclude that from government expenditure because if we include that, it's going to be double counted. Let's say government come give me $1,000. Okay, well, government spent $1,000. It should be part of his expenditure, right? Well, okay, if he does that, then what do? I get this $1,000. I go spend it as a household, as a C, as part of the C. I go spend it buy goods and services, right? Then if that goes to C, okay, and it goes to G, then it be double counted. Okay. Then we exclude from the government expenditure those transfer payments, like food stamp. Okay. We just calculate it when you spend on by households on goods and services. I'll make note of that one too. And again, export, we buy from them, that's import. They buy from us, that's our export. Then we get the net amount, export minus import, and that's going to be here in our identity. Okay? Let's look at this table here. These are actual numbers in 2015. Y equal to, right, all this component expenditure. And we know how each one is. The Y was almost $18 trillion. Okay, 100% of GDP, right? And you divide this 18 trillion by our population, how many was back in 2015, maybe 340, 320, whatever million people live here. We divide it by that, then we get with this per capita income. Per capita income. which means on average, everyone in US have access to $55,426. 55,426 per person. We know that's, on average, somebody like Bill Gates might just have, uh, uh, 5 billion, and somebody living under the bridge have 0, and somebody maybe have 100,000, somebody had 10,000. But on average, when we divide this $18 trillion by population, we come up with per capita income. Okay? All right. Then we got branched out on these 4 components. About 12 trillion of it is a big chunk of it. Is part of the household expenditure. Okay? About 3 trillion is part of the investment expenditure. Government expend about $3 trillion. And this year, ours is negative 529 was part of the expenditure by foreign sector, which means we import more than we export. Remember, the NX is equal to export minus import. When it's negative, which means we import more than we export. Okay, by about 529 billion. Okay, which is not a big chunk of GDP. And look at the percentage wise. It's about 3% of GDP. Our GDP rely on trade, on foreign sector. Government got about 17.7% of it. Investment of firms, pretty much the same as government, 16.8. The chunk of it is household expenditure. And we can kind of do it with the money too. About 37 $899 on average is spent on consumer goods. We're going to differentiate between 2 things here: nominal GDP versus real GDP. Again, I don't expect you to memorize it, but we're going to analyze it to learn it. Why do we need to differentiate between these 2? To calculate the inflation rate, okay? To capture the inflation rate in our economy. Real is value of output using the prices of the base year, okay, that we corrected for inflation. What do we mean by that? In the base year, real is equal to nominal. Okay, with the example probably make it clear for you. Let's say in our economy, we just make 2 goods, okay, pizza and coffee. Of course, we have millions of goods, right? For case of our simplicity to understand it, we just assume we have 2 items produced whole society in whole year. Okay? And we know in 3 consecutive years, from 2014, 15, and 16, in each year we know what the price of these items were and how many did we make. Okay? Then we're going to calculate the GDP. Remember, total market value of all final goods produced in our society. Okay. Then, if we just have those 2 goods, and if we have the quantity and we have the price, then we easily can calculate. Right? In 2014, okay, it was $10 each. We made 400 pizza. Coffee was latte was $2 each, and you made 1,000 of it. Okay? How you calculate the GDP here? Very easy, right? The GDP nominal term, market value of all goods services produced. Use 10 multiplied by 400, which is $4,000 worth of pizza, and 2 multiplied by 1,000, and it'd be 2,000 market value of all the coffee latte. You add them up together. It says, okay, in 2014 we had $6,000 worth of goods services that community produced. Okay, then you do the same thing for 2015 and 2016, and let's see here. We already did that right here. Okay, we come up with 6,000 in 2014, 8,250 for following year, which is 15, and 10,800 for the 2016. Now, these are nominal, which means we calculate the GDP in current prices. As you see, the prices in each year is different. Okay, we calculate the GDP in 2014 price, which was $10 and $2. Then we calculate GDP for 2015, the prices went up, so does the quantity up. Prices went up, quantity, sometimes the quantity might not go up, sometimes go down, but we calculate the current prices, and each year become different. Now we say, okay, we jump about 37.5% from 2014 to 2015. Okay? This jump here is the economic growth, so our GDP grew that much. And from 2015 to 2016, we grow almost 31%. Now, this is the nominal. We're going to differentiate this 37.5 jump. Was it devoted all to quantity changes or to price changes, or both? It's both, right? Then we're going to go differentiate. How much it because of the in real term we grow, how much it was devoted to actually price hike or price change or inflation. How can we do that? How can we do that? Well, it's easy to do. We're going to use 1 year as a base year. Let's say here we use 2014 as a base year price. We use these prices to calculate the following year's quantity. Okay, that's what we deflated, and we call it GDP deflator. Okay, let's just do it here. Okay, we calculate all those with the base year prices. Okay, with the base year prices. For 2014, well, we come up with the same number, right? Well, for 2015, if we use base year prices, okay, we come up with deflated. We get the inflation off of it. For 2016, we use the same price that we did on base year, and we come up with 8,400. Now you see, in real terms, we jumped 20%, not 37.5, because we deflate. We get the inflation out of it. Okay, we get the inflation out of it. Okay, these are real GDP. Those were nominal GDP. Those were nominal GDP. Okay. That's the definition here. Now, nominal GDP, you calculate the GDP in current prices, whatever it was. Real GDP, you pick 1 year as a base, you calculate that GDP on base year prices. Okay, that's just the difference. Nominal GDP measured using current prices, real GDP measured using constant prices. We choose 1 year as a base year. In our example, we did 2015. Okay. Let's go back in here. And the change in nominal GDP reflects both price and quantity, but the change in real GDP is the amount that GDP would change if prices were kind of constant. Hence, real GDP is corrected for inflation. We actually jumped 20%, not 37.5%. And that's what macroeconomics, right? We're dealing with big picture of the economy. What is the economic growth? How we calculate it? What is the inflation? How much the prices went up? Okay, and so on. Look at this chart here from back in 1960s. Nominal GDP, the red one, okay, goes up. Real GDP, sometimes it goes down. Okay. See, we got a period that nominal GDP exceeds the real GDP. See the gap here? See these gaps here? These are got to be inflation, right? And this last recession that we have, the real GDP and nominal GDP, they both decline. Our economic growth shrink. Now we are here. Okay, I bet we're going to be in, because of the coronavirus, we're going to be like this. We're going to be coming down. Okay, we're going to use this to calculate, to figure out the economic growth rate later on in upcoming chapters. Okay, but this kind of give you the idea of the difference between these two, real and nominal, to get the inflation out of it. It deflate the GDP, you come up with the real GDP. Okay, per capita, then we say a country real GDP is high compared with the other country. Are they better off economically? Well, of course, they got access to more material stuff. That's it, But GDP is not a perfect measure of well-being. It cannot capture a lot of other stuff, happiness or equality, or some of those stuff is not captured. It's not all. All it does is just material stuff. Of course, when the GDP is higher, which means we got more access to high school buildings. We have more access to hospitals or highways and things like that. But a lot of other stuff in human life is not captured just by GDP. That's what it's just comparing. This is a good phrase here from Senator Robert Kennedy. GDP does not allow for health of our children, does not allow for quality of their education. We can measure the joy of their play. We cannot measure the beauty of our poetry, and so on and all that, right? But it does not capture quality of environment, leisure time, happiness, non-market activity, or households activity done in their house, creating something, making food, or whatever they make. It does not capture by GDP. Okay? And also distribution of income. Some society that has a value, equality, equity, but GDP doesn't capture that. It just gives you a lump sum number, okay, that everybody on average makes. Having a large GDP, of course, enable a country to afford better, school choices, cleaner environment, healthcare, and so on. Many indicators of the quality of life are positively correlated with GDP. We know that, like let's say. You take a statistician going to go like this. See, make a graph. Okay, if you put life expectancy on the vertical here and put the GDP per capita here, we see those countries that have a higher GDP, like United States, Germany, Japan, they have the higher expectancy. They live longer. Versus like Nigeria here is low GDP, they just live 5. Pakistan, the average life would be less than 70 years and so on. Okay. Another indicator, let's say if you put average years of schooling, okay, the higher the GDP, okay, like US, Germany, Japan again, we get at least 12 years of high school graduate, at least. Okay. Versus Pakistan, 4 years high school. India, a lot of kids can afford to go. There's not that much schooling, schools to go to, right? Another criteria we are overall life satisfaction. Okay, you ask, take a poll. Here they might say we are happier than the guy here in Bangladesh or India or Nigeria, where the per capita, real GDP per capita is lower. Okay. Well, we glance through all those, components, but get the big picture here, right? The big picture, how are we going? This is a part of the macroeconomics, big phenomena of the economics we're going to study, right? And the big component of it would be how to measure uh, the GDP, gross domestic product, all the stuff that produced in our country within a year or a period of time. All right, let's just stop it here and give it a time. It'll be uploaded on your Blackboard, and you have access to it later on.